I am joined in studio now by Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus, former international spokesman for the IDF and a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, as you're hearing these different news and these different reports, it seems like this next week is certainly crunch time. What are you making out of the different rumblings we're hearing from these closed-door negotiations?
Yeah, what I make of it is that I think that neither Israel nor Qatar, and to a certain extent Egypt, but specifically Qatar, do not want to be the side that kind of blows a deal and is perceived by the incoming president as someone who prevented a deal from happening, which apparently is a clear desire of President-elect Trump. And as such, I think that what we will eventually see is a two-stage or three-stage deal where the easier topics and the things that where Hamas and Israel and to a certain extent Qatar and Egypt can find common ground, they will be done in the first stage, and then the more difficult topics of, for instance, the heavier or the murderers or Palestinian prisoners with more blood on their hands, or the more senior ones, their fate will be decided then. The permanent presence of Israeli troops, the perimeter corridors, the Philadelphia corridor, that is also a highly contentious issue. And I think that both sides will try to push the difficult topics towards the end and to at least have some kind of deal on paper so that when January 20 comes, they're not perceived as the side that ruined a possible deal.
And January 20th is just next Monday. I want to remind our viewers that is coming up, rapidly approaching. But until then, the fighting inside Gaza, it does continue. In fact, over the weekend, the death toll from Israel's ground offensive in Gaza rose to 400. 4 soldiers were killed and 6 injured during battles in northern Gaza, as the IDF recently intensified its operations in the area. Certainly intense fighting still ongoing inside the Gaza Strip. And so, Jonathan, Israel clearly paying the price for this ongoing war. But what are the gains that Israel's making as well? Is this seen as perhaps laying the groundwork in advance of a possible ceasefire inside Gaza?
To be honest, I'm not sure that I can say that is what's happening. And when I look at Israeli operations, I see more of the same in northern Gaza. And at the end of the day, these, we're in the last week, 9 soldiers were killed, and many, many more have been killed in the last month of operations in northern Gaza. Most of them as a result of direct hits of IEDs, improvised explosive devices. Some of them made that Hamas assembled while scavenging IDF or Israeli Air Force bombs and putting them, unfortunately, to use. I think that as long as we will continue to see this modus operandi of the IDF, of raids going in, executing military activity, killing, blowing up infrastructure, confiscating weapons, interrogating, etc., but then going back, as long as this will be the modus operandi, then Hamas will have the advantage of attacking Israeli troops on the roads, back and forth, and will be able to focus its efforts to wherever the IDF is operating in a certain time. And
so what needs to change then?
So following what the Minister of Defense said, if we really want decisive outcomes and we want to decide the war in Gaza, in my mind, the center of gravity is food, fuel, and the distribution of those goods to the civilian population. As long as we allow Hamas either directly or through its front organizations, UNRWA and others, to continue to distribute food to the population, Hamas is in power. And Hamas will remain in power until we take that power out of Hamas's hands, and the center of gravity is the distribution of humanitarian aid. So what Israel really needs to decide, and this comes back to the beginning of our broadcast here, where I said that neither of the sides, and specifically Israel, doesn't want to be seen by the incoming administration as someone who torpedoed a deal. I think that the Israeli thinking is, let's go ahead and sign a deal, but then second and third stages will be the stages where we actually go in and strategically change the situation. Strategically changing means actually taking away that source of power from Hamas so that they won't be able to continue to govern and will actually force them to come out with their hands up. Up until now, Israel has not done that. I think much to do with the international pressure, political pressure, and American directives on Israel. If a hostage deal fails, then Israel perhaps would have more political tools at its disposal in order to do what it needs to do, in order to break the will of Hamas to fight. Until we do that, it's tactical details, but it's not a strategic, decisive victory against Hamas.
Because at this point, if a ceasefire deal is fully signed, it still leaves Hamas in power, which is one of Israel's main stated war goals of eliminating Hamas and removing them from the Gaza Strip.
Yes, and also we could probably bet on that in a year, 2 or 5 from now, we will find ourselves fighting another iteration of Hamas, a Hamas 2.0, if we don't take care of Hamas now. So I see this, whatever will happen in the coming week, and I hope, of course, I pray like I suppose every Israeli does for the safe return of our hostages home. But at the end of the day, that will be, in my mind, a milestone, not the end of this current chapter between Israel and Gaza. If this is how it ends, it means that we can just start the hourglass and wait for the next round of military fighting between Israel and whatever will come after Hamas.
Coming back in studio, Jonathan Conricus, what are you making of these statements coming out from the PA right now?
Well, it's not the first time that the PA actually says things out in the open against Iran and criticizes Iran for meddling in Palestinian affairs and jeopardizing the safety and well-being of the Palestinian Authority and Palestinians. Why are they doing it? Because the Iranians they've really been very successful in destabilizing Judea and Samaria. They've been doing it through running weapons from Syria, Iraq and Syria, northern Jordan, into northern Samaria. And this has been going on for years. Israel hasn't protected its eastern border particularly well. And we've seen this spike for the last 2.5 years. We started seeing it, this spike in terrorist activity in Judea and Samaria. And when the first videos came out, it was interesting to see that all of them had almost new equipment. And then you started asking questions, well, where do they get the equipment from? It is from Iran. And the Palestinians see and understand that Iran wants to hit 2 birds with 1 stone, destabilize Judea and Samaria and the Palestinian Authority, and keep Israel even busier. That is why they're speaking out.
This is the front that's primed to explode. We have to go out for a quick break. Stay with us and we'll continue this conversation. Is Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus, former international spokesman for the IDF, as well as our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran. Jonathan, right now, 2 weeks, it seems, that this ceasefire, will it be extended? Will it be collapsed? Will Israeli troops fully withdraw from southern Lebanon? Because as it stands right now, it does not seem that the threat of Hezbollah will be eliminated in these next 2 weeks.
No, to be truthful, it isn't. And I don't think that Israel has done enough militarily against Hezbollah for that to be the reality. It is still unfinished business in Lebanon. I think that the chances of Israel withdrawing and actually implementing the end of the ceasefire and by day 60 actually withdrawing from southern Lebanon, the chances have gone up because of the election of Aoun as president and the significant diplomatic will from the US and France and others to give him kind of an easier start and to allow him to facilitate the ceasefire, deploy Lebanese armed forces down south. Very important to, I think, pay attention to what he said in his inaugural speech and afterwards as well. He specifically spoke about the monopoly of use of force that should be only in the hands of the military and the government, which is another way of saying Hezbollah shouldn't have weapons and the Lebanese state should have monopoly on the use of force, which is a good statement coming from the head of state from an Israeli perspective. So I think that there will be a lot of pressure on Israel to implement the ceasefire, even if this doesn't eventually really provide Israel with the security that it needs in order to basically allow Israeli civilians to go back to their homes. northern Israel will still not be safe, and the safety guarantees that will be there, I don't think that anybody really can say and sign that it will be enough for Israelis to go back to their homes, and then that will be 1 year and 4 months after the 7th of October with Israelis still out of their homes. And that is not a good diplomatic situation for Israel.
So with this operation that the Israeli Air Force carried out, this was a complex operation. We're talking about 20 different Israeli Air Force aircrafts, a great success, and they learn a lot of information by carrying out these missions. But Jonathan, why put Israeli fighters at risk by carrying out these type of missions when they could serve the Houthis with a taste of their own medicine, so to say, firing different ballistic missiles, drones, randomly at Yemen?
Israel could, and Israel has long-range ballistic missiles at its disposal, but I think Israel is keeping those weapons for almost doomsday scenarios. We haven't struck Iran with those missiles, nor Syria or Lebanon. They're kept for other scenarios. But it's a matter of accuracy. At the end of the day, rockets and missiles, their issue is, and the challenge is, to really strike the targets that you want. There's nothing better and more accurate than an Israeli Air Force pilot that has good intel and is then able to deliver ordnance exactly where it is supposed to be delivered. However, what Israel still is lacking, and it's quite odd, 15 months after the Houthis started firing at Israel, Israel still does not have the same necessary level of combat intel and targeting capacity of the Houthis. You can see that the last targets that Israel struck, we're still talking about infrastructure. It is still big stationary targets and not the high quality targets that we've seen Israel strike with great precision and effect in Lebanon, in Iran, in Gaza, and elsewhere. Not the
leaders as well.
So what Israel is busy doing now is establishing that intel network, collecting and analyzing intelligence, and I hope, scrambling in order to elevate those capabilities. I think the Houthis will continue to fight as long as the Iranians support them and as long as they have missiles. They seem to prioritize firing missiles towards Israel over everything else in Yemen. It is one of the most impoverished countries in the world. It relies on international aid to sustain the population, yet they manufacture rockets, they fire rockets, and they focus almost everything they have, the very little energy they have, on fighting against Israel. It defies logic, but at the end of the day, I think Israel needs to pivot in terms of intel and really start allocating more resources to deal with the Houthis. Just one word about Iran and how this all connects together. We see developments in Lebanon, which are to the detriment of Iran. We see developments in Syria, in Judea and Samaria, and with the Houthis as well. And we spoke about Jason Brodsky, I think, in very eloquent words, described the situation of the Islamic Republic. At the end of the day, in my mind, I think Israel has an opportunity. There is still a window of opportunity to strategically and significantly change the balance of power in the Middle East. We are still, even though we're 15 months into this war, we are still fighting according to the Iranian playbook of strategy. We're fighting against the proxies, and we're not dealing with the source of violence and instability in the region, and that is Iran, the Islamic Republic. The moment that we'll take the fight to them, and the moment that their capabilities will be sufficiently degraded, will be the moment that we will be able to enjoy more quiet and long-term stability. Until we do so, it's again an exercise in tactics and not really changing the strategic picture.
Going after the head of the snake to really
Indeed.
Change the entire region when it comes to the Middle East, and the main player, which seems to be Iran. Many of the Western powers seem to be very optimistic of this incoming Syrian leadership. But how is Israel walking around this, and what do they want to see come from the Syrian government?
I think what we're seeing is very, very cautious and hedged optimism on behalf of Europe. We haven't, I think, yet seen significant optimism from the US, and we'll see the incoming Trump administration, what they have to say and how they see the change of power there. But at the end of the day, this is a good achievement for the Saudis. It weakens Iran, as we spoke about before. It may be a good thing for the Syrian people, for minorities, for women, etc., that there may be unfreezing of sanctions, more investment. The Syrian economy is in dire need of reboot, or basically being rebuilt from the bottom up, and foreign investment. But at the end of the day, we're talking about an incoming or an interim government that is full of jihadis. And the Europeans are aware of it. I think the Europeans are less naive than they were before. And Israel is acutely aware of it. So there's, the desire to go forward and to do well and to see Syria transition from a dictatorship with probably the worst human rights record in the region to something that is more towards respectful of liberty, civil liberties and human rights. I dare not say a democracy yet, but we're still in very, very early stages. Like in so many other things, what Israel does many times is operates quickly militarily, but many times what we do not have is that strategic long-term thinking and shaping what do we want to achieve here from a strategic point of view. Not just defending our borders, which we did quickly, and deploying troops, but really...
But what we want to see.
Yes, what do we want to see?
For the vision of the future.
Yes, and how can we bring that about? Not what do we not want to see. We don't want to see jihadis on our borders. We don't want to see them endangering Israeli civilians. That's clear. But what do we want to see, and which opportunities can we either create or leverage?
And that remains unknown. Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus and our I24 News correspondent Balir Sladin, thank you for your insight on all of the developments happening right now in the Middle East.